if you guys remember last summit, which was like a month ago, we talked about creating a new group called Adopting FinOps. So this was a pretty popular request. And so we did kick that off. We're like 4 weeks into it. And I just want to kind of explain how the working group is working. So we do have a Slack channel that's dedicated to the working group. This is our kind of generic Adopting FinOps Slack right there. And we're meeting on Fridays, which this group has a very diverse time zone. So I want to give a big thank you to many people that are coming to meetings very early or evenings. But we meet for about an hour every Friday. And then we've had a couple breakout sessions as well. And then we've kind of had some homework stuff. So I just want to explain that sometimes, when you think about getting involved with a working group, it's about an hour to 2 hours worth of time commitment a week. So I do want to thank the many people that have been doing that this last 4 weeks. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Eric Peterson, and he will speak through kind of our lighthouse that we have recently launched.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. So it all began for all of us in many ways with a vision that FinOps was at the core of what we were working on and what we were trying to get at. And for me, this journey started a long time ago. For all of us, it may have started a long time ago or may have just started yesterday. But when we think about adopting FinOps, we want to make sure that everyone understands what our shared vision is. And so we sat down to think about that vision and our mission as we started this project. And it's as simple as that we see FinOps as something bigger than just saving a few dollars here and there, but actually unlocking this promise that cloud computing has really kind of unlocked in our minds for us. And we want to share that, of course, with the world, but most importantly, help organizations adopt FinOps and make that journey successful for them. So our mission is to serve you, the community, the FinOps community, the folks that are looking for guidance, education, enablement materials that we can provide you with the tools in order to bring FinOps into your organizations, whether you're coming from the bottoms up as an individual contributor, or you're an executive looking to start a FinOps practice within your organization. We want to help guide you with that material. So our mission is to serve you and the community and achieve that goal so that we can all be part of this shared vision of FinOps unlocking this promise of cloud computing. So that was our lighthouse statement in terms of how we started thinking about bringing all this stuff together. And the team has done a lot of great work as well to think about the personas and the other parts of this process. So Ashley, back to you.
Thanks. And so this was probably one of our first deliverables. And then the second deliverable we've been working towards is creating an adoption roadmap for what we're calling the driver persona. So I'll hand it over to Mike to go through that.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Well said, Eric. So we've identified in the working group, by the way, has the Slack channel has like 43 people in it. And we've had meetings with 13 or 15 people on them in a single meeting, which is really quite good turnout considering these are volunteers basically. And so we're really actually, I think, getting some good momentum in the working group. And we're working on things that we think practitioners will need, like the persona of the driver and what are the personas of the various stakeholders that the driver will have to interact with. We'll get to that in a minute. And then we've been working on the roadmap. And so this, nice graphic doesn't really do it justice. So I took the liberty of putting a tiny URL there on the bottom, Adopting FinOps Roadmap. That'll take you to the Google Doc where we've been collaborating and taking down notes. And we see certain patterns that you have, you have to lay down a foundation. So you have a planning phase, socialize, prepare, launch. We all know about run. That's where we want to get to. The question is, how do you get there? And so in the planning phase, you're identifying your stakeholders and your pain points. You're also getting in that stage, you're identifying your first KPIs. These are very useful for painting a vision of where you could be when you get into the run phase, and you're creating a communications plan. You go through this socialize stage. This is where you're starting to cultivate champions that you're going to need in later phases, where you establish kind of the operating model of how this is going to play out. Then we go to the prepare phase. This is where you're configuring tools, setting up dashboards, if there's any kind of chargeback and showback functions. But at this point, you're also getting early wins because those are leverage that you use from the early phases to achieve more champions and more wins later. And then the launch phase, so you establish your communications plan back in around stage 2. So this is where you're executing your communications plan. You established a steer code back around stage 2. This is where you're actually getting the cadences going with them, and you do a broad-based launch. So I only had 60 seconds, and that's why I put that link to the tiny URL in there. I'm going to throw it back to Ashley, but now we've got great people working on this and thinking about this, and you can see in the Slack channel who's been contributing, and we really appreciate the help. It's been, I think, really good to identify the common phases, the common challenges, and the plan is to create more materials around all of this so that you have a walk-around deck that you can take to these various stakeholders, maybe some initial KPIs that you can use to help paint the vision, and so on. So I think I'm probably out of my 60 seconds. I'm going to throw it back to next slide, Ashley. And,
Thanks, Mike.
Try to hold the time.
Perfect, you did great. Yeah, so just going to the next slide here. So as much as the driver's gonna have the roadmap, they're probably gonna need to understand who they're working with. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Elise to explain where we were going with personas next.
Yep. Thank you. Hi, I'm Elise. So as these discussions progressed, this idea of the FinOps driver, we kind of realized, okay, this is actually more of a bit of a unicorn where you have to collaborate across teams in a broad fashion. So have that common vocabulary or lexicon, however you want to put it, for all of the various teams, whether it was the executives, the finance teams, so including procurement, we heard earlier, the engineering teams, as well as the product teams. So the deliverables and the goals that we wanted to achieve was to have this content and information across each of these personas in order to convince and adopt FinOps. So if you actually go into the next slide, JR, please. Awesome. So what we ended up having and was this first kind of template for these personas. And we said, okay, what are they trying to achieve? What are their motivators and what are their incentives? And then we started to fill out those goals, those concerns, and the messaging per, at the time we said, all right, business, tech, finance, what does that look like? If you go next one more time, you'll see an example of a matrix that we put together as far as, okay, what does that messaging look like for, kind of the champions or the audience? So how would you speak to each of these people? And lastly, the other matrix that we came up with, so one more next, we had a matrix to understand the personas from an accountability. At first, we weren't sure if we wanted to say responsibility or we ended up saying D for driver, depends on every organization is going to want to call it a little bit differently, as well as who needs to be informed of what's going on and who needs to have control as to what's going on. So I will wrap up by saying the next step, what we're looking to achieve in the next couple of weeks and time moving forward with this working group is to develop presentations, short, sweet, little presentations in order to drive these interactions and have it scoped to each of the personas so that we can understand the language and understand, how do we want to influence these people and develop messaging through that so that there's a higher success rate that FinOps is actually adopted within your organization. So thank you.
Perfect.
Pass it back to Ashley. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think perfect with all this stuff, I think these are the initial documentations and we'll keep iterating on them. And I think we constantly learn from you guys about your adoption journeys. And so I think that at this point, we want to kind of let Natalie step in and share a little bit about her adoption stories. And then we'll have Melvin after that.
Hello. Can you guys hear me? Yeah?
Yes, we can.
So. Okay, great. So my adoption journey, HSBC's adoption journey, I think I'll try and tie it back to many of the key points that have been raised, but I recognize them all. I think initially the planning stage for us as HSBC was to wholeheartedly decide to go on that cloud journey. As an organization, without that decision and without that senior commitment, there wasn't really a FinOps conversation to be had. And one of the challenges, once that happened and that maturity settled in, we saw a rapid uptick in cloud consumption across multiple vendors. So we have a multi-cloud strategy. And as a result of that, it presented a number of challenges for us that were, I suppose, the anchors I used to get that stakeholder buy-in or to get that understanding and commitment from the wider organization. Simple things like the inability to manage the level of cloud spend on an Excel spreadsheet. We simply ran out of lines. Talking about basically how we then optimize the growth that we could see whilst not really seeing a reduction in on-prem costs. So all of those things came together and basically helped us put forward the proposal around FinOps. We had to talk with the business stakeholders around revenue and flexibility. The IT stakeholders were around optimizations, saves, impacting the bottom line, but also the engineering community around actively being part of that and having more autonomy and control at being able to deliver those optimizations utilizing FinOps. We now have, somebody mentioned earlier, champions and RACI. So we have a target operating model wrapped around the way that we manage the FinOps function and the processes that we implement across the global businesses and global functions. It's a centralized team that works in coordination with all of the businesses, technical resources and senior stakeholders. And we now have pockets of champions that beyond those that we allocated in the early days to actually drive within the businesses, the adoption, we now have more senior people volunteering to tell our story throughout the organization on steercos and more senior forums where they discuss strategy and direction. So that has evolved out of, I suppose, building a core team with some clear guidance around how we interact with each other and how we present the benefits of what we do. And then had taken on a life of its own in some ways, and moved to how we are represented beyond our team in other areas across the bank. And we continually provide those outputs and that focus and the narrative, and also training and education. So we've started that as well internally to bring those who are impacted closer to what we're doing, and therefore enable us to translate all the great outcomes of our activities and our tactics and what that means to the business and also finance. So initially it was quite a difficult uphill journey, but it's definitely, I think, gathering momentum and having wider understanding across a very traditional financial environment.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Natalie. I think we're going to turn it to Melvin to share a little bit of his adoption story next.
Yep, I'm here. Just got to get off the mute button. So my journey here with the federal government, we are in what I would consider to be the crawl stage. We're very early in our adoption journey. The things that we wanted to accomplish is based on our lessons learned from having done these at previous agencies is our spending gets out of control. And the federal government, unlike industry, our budgets are different. We don't have, I can't raise my prices in order to make up for cost overruns. And that's different for us. And so when I get budget from Congress, it's fixed. And so I can't afford to have cost overruns on our cloud environments. And so we've had some that have run over real bad. And so we couldn't get a good handle on our spending. And so ran into the book, and now we were able to at least start to build a framework from scratch. And so we're starting with a brand new cleaner site. We're starting to migrate everything to our Azure clouds. And so what we're doing now is we're putting all the governance in place, which included FinOps. And that's the foundation for what we're doing on the governance side. We're getting everybody trained. We've identified, key people within the organization, and we're using training as the foundation to get everybody in the same language so that we're all going in the same direction. And so I believe that training is going to be key for anybody that wants to go forward. You need to get everybody trained that's going to participate at the outset and getting them to develop a common language. So we're taking that step. We've already developed the strategy. We're using the 3 pillars from the book, and now we're starting to work on a government playbook, which is going to look a little different from industry, but we'll be able to leverage some of the best practices. But we want to lead the way in building a playbook that other government agencies can use as we go forward, highlighting our differences. We've got a government-only Slack channel now, and so we're happy about that, and that's starting to grow. But that's pretty much where we are. We've got we're starting to write statements of work for vendors and contractors to support us in that effort, so that becomes reusable for other government agencies to use, and what some of our key metrics will be for success going forward. So that's pretty much our journey. Selling it on the inside of government. So I'm not a big sales guy, so I'll be honest with you. I don't go around with a tin cup and a marketing program trying to sell it. The one thing I did do is I just said, hey, look, we're not getting any more money, and if we don't do FinOps, then we're not going to be successful in our cloud journey. And I just kind of left it at that. And so from the CFO's perspective, the thing that they wanted to hear was that this is going to be something that's going to help us to manage our costs and get us to a more mature chargeback and showback. And that was just putting it in their language was what was helpful to them. And so thank you.
Thank you. That's amazing. That's one of my favorite things is no matter the industry you're in, we're all facing the same problems and kind of coming up with the same solution. So it's great to hear that about your journey. Next thing I want to do is switch over to Menti. So I believe Rob has put this inside of the chat. So while we were working in our adoption group, there was a couple questions that kept coming back to us and kind of had different perspectives about it. And we thought it'd be really useful to hear from the community. I'm happy to see over 500 people on the call today. So if you could go to menti.com and put in the code and start answering this question. Within your organization, was FinOps born from a top-down or a grassroots approach? And if it was grassroots, what type of grassroots? So we have, it was an executive mandate, top-down, engineering sold it to management, grassroots, finance sold it to management, grassroots, someone else sold it to management, grassroots. So please take a few minutes to answer, give it a couple of seconds, and then we will show results and discuss.
I've never had a Menti with this many people in it before, so I'm hoping for the best.
Hopefully didn't break it, right?
Look at the.
Look at that. The engineers are being the most cost conscious. I love that.
Yeah.
Riley's smiling over there, I'm sure. You know, he sold it to his org.
Yeah, so how we kind of incorporate this into the working group is also realizing that what we create for a driver, we can't assume that personality of that driver, we can't assume that role that they're coming from, and so being kind of agnostic to the fact that that persona that's the driver may be coming from a different area of the business is really important for us.
It's really interesting. I'm curious if anybody was in these sold it. Who sold it?
Rob, I missed what you said there.
I'm just curious who all these others who are selling to management were from. That would be an interesting thing.
We're gonna have to run another survey.
Yeah, I think join, please, any of you who voted for the last one, please join the Adopting FinOps working group and share with us. Okay.
This is Maggie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So at least from my perspective, for engineering sold it to management. I know you're talking about someone else, but I just want to make a comment about engineering. I know that engineering sold it because management was asking about forecasting, and without FinOps, how do you effectively forecast and optimize? So that was the driver behind engineering selling it to management.
Really interesting. Thanks.
All right, we'll pivot to the last Menti question we have for you guys all today.
Hey, Ashley and Rob, just as a placeholder for later, it would be great. Maybe we should consider sending this link out in the Slack and email and get even more data for it, because I think we could really build on this over time.
We'll do that.
That's a good point.
Hey, if you're watching the chat, we might need to add some more categories.
All right, next question I want to ask is really why did your organizationally additionally adopt FinOps? So not necessarily why are you doing FinOps right now, but why did you initially adopt? And so we want to understand if it was a driver was cost savings to create value or quality and operational resistance.
Hey, Ignacio, how are you?
So you can do the same thing as you're going to go to the Menti.
So yes, so
Quick on the mute. I don't think that was related.
I got you covered with the mute.
All right, we're both muting. Luckily, Zoom brings the person speaking to the top of the list.
There we go. Boom.
Okay. Okay.
I did just mute the entire call, so Ashley and Rob, you have to unmute yourselves again.
Okay,
This is pretty good. I think this correlates to a lot of what we were discussing too. You know, initially when you adopt, the trigger does seem to be we've got to save money. We're going over budgets. You know, we've seen the statistics about 80% of cloud is going to go over budget next year. So that does correlate a lot to what we've seen. I'm curious if anybody would want to dive a little bit more on the create value, whether it's in the chat channel of, you know, what was that value you were trying to create?
Be interesting
Or
to look
unmute
at this
yourself.
one as well to see if save cost was the initial adoption cell, how that evolved over time, right? For the more run stage people, if that maintained as the primary one, or if it moved into the others based on stage.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I like the TCO moving to on-prem, so trying to create value. May not be able to save money when you're moving right away, but understand the value. It's a great one. All right, awesome. I don't know where we're at for time. I love the idea, so we'll post the Menti link just so we can capture some other inputs. I think the last slide we just have here is just how to get involved. So we're in week 4. We are going to ideally do another 4 weeks. We mentioned the roadmap, the personas, and next up for us is really trying to put together some content for that driver. So I have 2 calls for action. First one is if you've done a presentation or you've pitched your adoption and you have some of that slide material that you feel like you can pull enough of your company data out and share with us, we really appreciate those slides being posted onto the Slack channel. That will just allow us to kind of see, well, what needs to go into a pitch? Do we need to put ROI into it? Do we need to put where the state of their spend is now? So we want to get some insights from you. If you've pitched it before, what did you put into it? So either share some of your slide decks or even go ahead and post out in that channel. Like, don't forget that you're going to need to pitch this, right? The second way you can get involved is, like I said, we're meeting on Fridays. Our next meeting is tomorrow. It's 12 p.m. Central. 11 p.m. Central, I'll take that back. So go ahead and join the channel and let myself or Tracy or Rob know that you're interested in getting involved, and we'll have you pulled into the conversation. Even though we've started, don't feel like you can't jump right in. We can have you read the material. And like I said, we've got the next big deliverable that we could definitely use some help with. I think of Jer, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yes, thank you. So you all have definitely upped the bar. I guess we call you bar raisers if we're using the Amazon term in terms of working groups. I think that's the first time we've had a mission and vision. Great to see that also aligned really closely to the overall FinOps Foundation mission and vision. So yeah, this is a great example of a working group that is, you know, building and growing, that I think will be going on, you know, for hopefully a long time, and a great way for any of you to get involved, obviously with this one, you know, if you want to participate, or some of the upcoming ones.